Okay, so before we go further in the text itself, I want to go through a few of the notes from last week. And that's I have up on the screen here. Make it a little bit smaller so it fits. Um, the note number five, he says that Moshe was always in a potential state of prophecy. He could receive God's revelation at will in a state of waking consciousness at any time and any place. Of course, this is very different than any other Navi, where he had to enter a trance in order to be able to get a nevuah. Moshe Rabbeinu was therefore, since he had no prior warning, as when the nevuah would come. So therefore, that's why he had to separate himself from his wife during the time when he potentially could have nevuah. I don't have any evidence for this, but to me it seems pretty clear from the psukim that during the 38 years between the Chet Meraglim and the death of the Dor Midbar, Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah was that of a regular navi for the most part, because the very little of the Torah was actually given during that time. Most was given until the Chet Meraglim, and after the after Pashas Chukas, when the Dora Midbar had died. So therefore, I don't think that he necessarily had to separate himself from his wife. I don't think he necessarily had the state of Nevuah, which was, as we know, something which was a gift on account of Bnei Israel, not something which Kosh Baruch Hu normally would give even to Moshe Rabbeinu, perhaps in this world, but was a special gift, and therefore that was something which I don't know if he had during those 38 years. Again, I've never seen him mentioned that whether you've had it or didn't have it during that time. To me, it seems that he probably did not have that high level nevuah during that period of time, at least rarely. Okay, so the here in note number 7, it says a very interesting thing. The Torah is thus referred to as pardes, and across the acrostic for pshat, remez, drash, and sod. And for some reason, it never hit me till this week, till 2 days ago, that the word paradise is the word pardes. Now, I don't know why it never hit me. It hit me because I was using an AI program to give a title to one of my shorts, and it's titled one of my shorts, which with Rabbi Akiva entered into Pardes. Rabbi Akiva entered into paradise. So then I realized, oh, paradise and paradise are the same word. Okay, so entering into paradise in our perspective is entering into the highest forms of sod. Okay, perhaps other people realize that. I just never realized before. And then he adds an interesting thing. When at the end of the year, when the fifth level of Rosin's to semen, hidden mysteries is added, these parallel the five levels of the soul in the five universes. So, of course, that includes Adam Kadmon, besides Tzias Bria Tzia Sia, that includes Adam Kadmon, and includes Yechida, besides Nefesh Neshama Chaya. And evidently, this is from Degamach and Ephraim, which is the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, which is interesting because it's type of Kabbalistic insight. Expect to find it much more primarily Kabbalistic safer, but evidently this is in this. The Ephraim that the Razin Semen is an even higher level than Pardes, and I don't know if Rabbi Kiva actually reached that level of Razin Semen. Perhaps it corresponds to the 50th Shara Bina. I don't know anything about it. Okay, in footnote 9, he says, which of course not Kabbalistic sources per se, indicate the spirit of prophecy that Moshe imparted to Yeshua included details of the mysteries of the spiritual realm. So it's evidently he gave them, according to them, he gave them these Kabbalistic ideas. Accordingly, Yeshua reached the 10th level of prophecy, the highest level next to that of Moshe, who was supposed to have reached the 11th level, which this is, he notes over here that the commenting on Psalm 90, which is called the Prayer of Moshe, the Medrash notes that the Moshe composed 11 psalms which contain the techniques of prophecy. That's indicating that these psalms are used as a means of attaining prophecy. Okay, so he says see also, etc. Where Psalm 91, that's Yoshe B'Seitzer Elyon. It's called Psalm of the Stricken One, Shir Shel Pagoyim. This name is clarifying the Medrash states that when Moshe ascended in the spiritual realm of Mount Sinai, he recited the psalm in order to be protected from the forces of evil. Uh, Rabbi writes that this psalm was meant to protect the ascending mystic against the going insane when he attempted to penetrate the mysteries of the spiritual dimension. So it's interesting. Rabbi was also not, you know, known for being the Kabbalah. Kabbalah clearly held that there is this idea of meditation which uplifts a person in higher realms and need to be protected. It's interesting to note that Yoshe B'Sei is also it's understood to be Shishim Kohen because it's supposed to protect against physical harm. And the Seder Otzat Tfilos, I forget which parishes, maybe the Dover Shalom, says that that is the reason why in the entire Yoshe B'Sei Yon, the letter Zion does not appear. Because Zion represents clay Zion. It represents the weaponry. And it's going to tell us that no weaponry will be successful if you invoke the Shir Shem Goyim, this song psalm which protects against harm. So it's another remez which they give there, which is that the fact that it's missing the letter Zion represents that there are 7 times on Motzei Shabbos throughout the year we don't say Yoshe B'Sei Sarayon, which are the Aryeh Shabbosos before Yom Tov, that Motzei Shabbosos before Yom Tovim, and the Motzei Shabbosos which come out on Chol HaMoed. Okay, so footnote 11. Since the preparations for prophecy were extremely rigorous, every individual who desired to attain the prophetic state had to have a master and a guide. With the exception of Yeshaya, every prophet in the Bible received his prophetic powers through his teachers. Now, it could be this is true, and it says it there, but it's not clear to me that that's the case. It seems, for example, for Yirmiyahu, that the nevuah he got came very much out of the blue. Again, could be that according to these sources, even Yirmiyahu had to prepare. And we have a famous Yerushalmi by Yoina that says that Yoina got his nevuah on account of his going to the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. And the Chazal say that Misham Shovim Ruach HaKodesh. So it sounds like there were, this not so simple. That this is definitely the case. That you have to have a master and guide. We know, of course, there were the yeshivas set up by Shmuel, the Bnei Hanavim yeshivas, which was set up in order to train people to prophecy. Yes, there certainly were training programs to accomplish prophecy, and I'm sure they were rigorous and had masters and guides. But I think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would send prophecies to people sometimes out of the blue. And it could be by Moshe Rabbeinu, even by the sneh. Although it seems that he wasn't so surprised, but it seems like, again, it comes out of nowhere. So I don't know that this would be the only possible approach. I suspect that there are many people that, yes, usually, a person has to train to become a Navi. But there were exceptions to the rule where HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided, for whatever reason, to bestow nevuah on somebody, or they were an event, which was a life-changing event, like the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, where it was so transcendent. I guess, those of you who go to Uman, maybe you have such moments where, you have these or other places like that, transcendent moments, which even though you did not prepare for them, they have this profound impact. I don't think I've ever experienced one, but I can imagine it, and I would hope that some people do. Okay. The number 12 is well known. We'll go through it anyway. The innermost chamber, both the sanctuary and the temple, was the Holy of Holies, in the center, which stood the Ark of the Covenant and the Keruvim. The entire structure of the Ark and the Keruvim is described in detail in this week's parsha, of course. They were made under the personal supervision of Moshe after he descended from Har Sinai. By Betzalel, under Moshe's supervision. God thus said to Moshe, I will commune with you, speak with you from above the ark cover, from between the 2 keruvim, which are on the ark of testimony. Again, this week's parsha. Thus indicating that the primary influence of prophecy came through the 2 keruvim in the Holy of Holies. So the next line is a very bit cryptic. What was true of Moshe was true of other prophets as well. But I assume what he means is that the Ruach HaKodesh, when Ruach HaKodesh was operative in a very direct way, it came from between the keruvim and spread out from there to wherever it's supposed to go. But surely he doesn't mean that actually, I shouldn't say surely. Why am I sure? Why should I be sure? But I don't know that he means that at all times the Kruvim are the place in which prophecy comes. Now, there is a Masorah, of course, that of one of the places they say the Oron is buried. Chazal have numerous places where the Oron might be buried, and for that matter, the Ethiopians say that they have it in one of their churches in Ethiopia. Who knows? They don't let us go in to check. But in any event, there is a strong tradition, among other traditions, that the Aron is buried directly under the Kodesh Kodashim, and it's operative the same way underneath the Kodesh Kodashim as it was when it was in the Kodesh Kodashim. In which case, this would make sense to say that even today, even subsequent to its being put in hiding by Yoshio HaMelech, it still had that impact. But no, is it? I'm not certain that that's when that's the case. That's what it means to say. But he says that line. But it's possible that Ruach HaKodesh according to that, even Bisman after the time after it was put into Knesset, still comes to that place. Okay, and that's what he says. Yechezkel was exiled to Bavel with King Yechonia. Later, as part of the destruction of the first temple, the ark had already been concealed by King Yoshio. However, a prophecy was already extremely difficult to attain. So evidently, again, it's not clear. So is it still coming to the ark and was difficult to attain, or was it coming from somewhere else afterwards? I don't know. I don't know how we would know. Then he says that the Mishnah Chagiga talks about going up to Ma'aser Merkava. He says in the greater chambers, Eicholos Rabasi. See, this referred to practice and not mere theory. Of course, it's something he's going to expand upon in the book. Okay, members the Anshei Gedolah. So the Great Assembly, the Anshei Gedolah, was led by Ezra beginning of the period of the Second Temple when the prophecy was about to cease totally. As Supreme Court of the Jewish people, they undertook to enact legislation that would make Judaism viable in the diaspora. Thus, they also fixed the Bible canon and ordained the various standard prayers and services. Most importantly, they abolished the lust for idolatry that existed during the time of the prophets in order to prevent the masses turning to idolatrous practices as a substitute for true prophetic meditation. So we know, of course, that many Sfarim say, Tzaddik says that the Meshech Chochmah, which he quotes here, I don't think Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan ever quotes from Tzaddik, which is, oh well, it's a great loss. But in any event, that Meshech Chochmah quote says that the Zel Zuma Zeh Osalokim, there was this correspondence between the spirit of Nevuah and the spirit of Avodah Zarah, and if you lose one, you lose the other. Right, the spirit of Avodah Zarah was a tremendous quest for spirituality. Spirit of Nevuah was a tremendous quest for spirituality. One in the right direction, one in the wrong direction, but they're linked together. And whenever you lose, just like with Aryeh, when they took away the Yetzer of Aryeh afterwards, that they made back because also the positive aspects of Aryeh, the desire to procreate and have children, and even to produce eggs, was taken away. So to here, the positive aspect of quest for spirituality was taken away, and therefore the Nevuah became much, much harder to accomplish. Of course, just like there's still residual Avodah Zarah in the world, lots of it. So evidently there would be still residual Nevuah. But it's not the quest for spirituality which existed, doesn't exist in the same way. And that, of course, is what Menashe, the king, said to Rav Ashi when Rav Ashi wanted to speak about our friend Menashe. Menashe came to him in a dream and said, I'm your friend. If you had been at the time alive in my time, you would have picked up the hem of your garment and run to Avodah Zarah. We hoped the hem of our garment would trip us up, so it would be prevented going to Avodah Zarah because the drive for spirituality was so great at the time of the first base of Mikdash until the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah was eradicated. That it created a powerful drive for spirituality in both directions. Okay, this is basically where we got up to in the text last time. So let's go back to the text we're up to. We're over here on page is this 4. As a result of these persecutions, the oral tradition from Sinai, in particular the Kabbalah tradition, was in danger of being forgotten. At this time, Rabbi Akiva received this tradition. He was considered the greatest sage of his generation and master of the revealed Torah as well as the concealed. Rabbi Akiva possessed the Merkava chariot tradition. And footnote on this. I'm not going to turn back there, but he says that Rabbi Akiva, he got it from Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, who himself was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So it was a direct connection to Rabbi Yochanan ben Akana from prior generations. Many sources attribute to Rabbi Akiva the authorship of Sefer Yetzirah, book of formation, one of the oldest and most obscure Kabbalistic texts. Well, it's a little bit of a assertion there that the Sefer Yetzirah is a Kabbalistic text. The Sefer Yetzirah is interpreted, as we know, many, many different ways. So, but one of the ways to interpret it is Kabbalistically. And it's Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's one of his other great works is, of course, his interpretation, his commentary on Sefer Yetzirah. So just the great bulk of the Talmud bears Rabbi Akiva's stamp. We know that all the great sages of the middle period of Mishnah, I should say, were students of Rabbi Akiva. So does the Sefer Yetzirah. As Rabbi Akiva transmits his teachings in a well-defined form. At this time, Rabbi Yochanan ben Akana's disciple, the high priest Rabbi Shlomo ben Elisha, put into writing the Sefer HaBoyer, the Book of Illumination, which of course Rabbi Kaplan also wrote interpretation commentary on, and the Pirkei Cholos, the Pirkei Cholos Abasi, the greater book of divine chambers. These traditions redact the traditions they received in order to preserve them from oblivion during the violent times in which they lived. Commenting on the Mishnah quoted above, Rashi asserts that one of the main texts of study of Ma'aser Merkava was the Pirkei Cholos Rabasi. This text contained actual meditative text contains, not contained, it's still extant, of course, actual meditative exercises, disciplines, and directions for entering the prophetic state. So let's go back a minute to the note here, because he does have a long note on this. Over here in 23, so concerning the revealed tradition, it is taught that all major Talmudic texts follow Rabbi Akiva. Although these texts are not committed to write Rabbi Akiva, the text teaching had been worded by him. It was this precise wording that was taught orally. So it is important to understand that Rabbi Akiva, what it says here, precise, each Talmud had his own version of it. It's not, but each Talmud tried to be precise, but by definition, when something is oral tradition, there are going to be variations. And that's why Rabbi Nossi had to work to sift through what exactly was the best possible text. He says that it is possible that Rabbi Akiva also produced an oral text of Sefer Yetzirah for students to memorize. It is expected of no different than the rest of the oral tradition. At first transmitted by word of mouth, written notes being kept privately in order to preserve the traditions. These notes are collected in hidden scrolls. It seems highly probable, however, that Sefer Yetzirah was already in its present form when the Mishnah was redacted in 204 CE, which means it was pretty early. The name Bahir is derived from the first verse quoted in the text, and now they do not see the light. It is brilliant in the skies. Okay, that's not so important for us. Rabbi Shmuel served as high priest just before the destruction of the second temple. There are actually two Rabbi Shmuels, Ben Elishas. But he was one of them. He was his disciple along with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, the great Akiva, Rabbi Muziel, many others. And Cholos Rabasi, and they Cholos Rabbi scribes Harry and Nechina taught about the heavenly chambers and names of the angels who guard their gates in meditation and Kabbalah. It actually gives he gives expansive translations of the Cholos and how they would go up. And of course, the Gemara, in Gemara, the Kinos, it says that the Kinos or the Yom Kippur, one of them, how Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha went up to Shamayim to ask about the Gzeira, which of the Sarugei Malchus. And it is one of the closest, one of the few ancient tracts that explicitly describe how to ascend through the mystical chambers in a spiritual Merkava one creates for oneself. It's interesting the way he puts it, right? We may create a spiritual vehicle. The key appears to be a type of mantra meditation where a series of divine names is repeated 112 times. One of my favorite parts of Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's Sefer Yetzirah is where he says basically it's pretty easy to create a golem. It's not so hard. It's just you have to be able to concentrate for 7 hours straight without any distraction. If you can do that, piece of cake. So, like this is the mantra meditation, where a series of divine names repeat 112 times. Sure, anybody can do it, right? Okay, so going back, let's go back to the text. Um, the Zohar. One of the main pillars of Kabbalah was Torah Rishon Bechai around 135 CE. That's slightly after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Rabbi Shimon also lived during these tumultuous times when the Romans were actually killing all the great teachers, the sole transmitters of the revealed and concealed traditions. During the 30 years, Rabbi Shimon spent hiding a cave with his disciples. He taught that what he had received from his teachers. During this time as well, he received divine inspiration and merited the revelation of Eliyahu Hanavi. There was a tradition that if the oral Torah was endangered to the point of being forgotten, it was permitted to put it into writing. Therefore, all the masters, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Nechunya, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon, set a precedent. They began committing parts of the oral tradition to writing. Despite this, however, all of these texts were not given the full, final form for several generations after these teachers. This would be the task of their disciples. And of course, in the Zohar, there are other sages quoted. It's not just Rabbi Shimon Yochai. The later sages quoted because the Zohar, like the Gemara, was an ongoing work. It was whatever Shimon Yochai wrote. If he wrote any part of it, it was only a small part of it. He probably, like it says here, that it's quite possible that he didn't write much of it all, but they began amassing a formal text, which then became written down. And it's interesting because the Rabbi Shmuel Gaon says similar thing about the Mishnayos. He says Rabbi knows he did not write down the Mishnayos. He brings things down from. I think also Rashi brings this down in the Gemara somewhere. He started making a formal body, and which would include a synopsis and a very highly polished form of the statements of the rabbis who preceded him. But there was only actually written down later on during the period of Amoraim. Okay. That's important. Important point. In the notes in the back, he elaborates about this a little bit. I'm not going to go turn the pages again, but he left the cave in Meron around the year of 138, shortly after the death of Hadrian, who was the one who destroyed Beitar at the end of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And he says that it was actually written down formally some 70 years later. Okay, so and then he says that there are some obviously earlier parts of Zohar, but later parts of Zohar can be up to 70 years later. And of course, let's this list note we should see inside. He says here, in the case of Shimon's school, the Zohar consists of volumes of notes in manuscript form which are hidden away in a vault and not uncovered until the 13th century. After I don't know where the vault was, but the vault somehow they ended up in Spain, so they traveled. So after limited circulation, 1270 to 1280s, these notes came out in the hands of Moshe de Leon, who lived in Spain, who finally edited and published them in the 1290s. The Zohar itself provides a clue for this long period of concealment. Saints should be revealed in preparation for final redemption 1,200 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. Since the temple was destroyed in year 70, that would mean that the Zohar was meant to reveal in 1270. So, of course, that there's a big difference of opinion between the academics and the non-academics till this very day, whether Zohar was written earlier or whether it's the product of Moshe de Leon's imagination. And if you're an academic, I think you're required by the rules of academia to assume the Zohar was a later composition. And if you are from the preponderance of believing Jews, then you believe that the Zohar was written much earlier, and Moshe Leon only published it. Rabbi Kaplan in Meditation Kabbalah spends a great deal of time on this issue, and he wants to prove that Rabbi Yitzchak de Minaco, who was sent to verify the authenticity of Zohar, did verify its authenticity, not where he recorded his trip, where the manuscript is missing, but elsewhere in his writings. A very fascinating passage there, sleuthing by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. But an important point to make is that, from my perspective, that I don't. What do I know? All I know is that nobody among the academics is holding by the level of, just for me, Reb Tzadok and the Gra. So for the Gra and Reb Tzadok, the Zohar was authentic. For me, that's good enough. And even people like Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who are very often quoted as noting their later interpolations in the Zohar, they don't reject the Zohar in its totality. They just say the text was subject to corruption over time. You find that in any text which is manuscript, most often in the Yerushalmi, but it's because Yerushalmi was a Sofrim over time, put things in, took things out. But even the Bavli, the only reason why the Bavli is so assumed to be so, so to speak, precise, is because generation by generations of Rishonim have gone through it and clarified the Girusos, clarified the what should be in there, what shouldn't be in there. But as recently as the Bach in the 17th century, and the Gra in the 18th century, and even the Rashash in the 19th century, the people were still working on the text of the Vilna, right? And say, okay, and changing things and amending things. So in yeshiva, we don't focus on that so much, but it's not uncommon in anything which is in manuscript for thousands of years that there should be later interpolations, later additions, later subtractions. So therefore, I can accept Rabbi Yaakov Emden's in his noting some obvious additions and changes over time, but no, I don't think that it detracts from the major body of the Zohar being from ancient times. Okay, if we have a few minutes left. Okay, so all of these texts, the major texts, the Yitzhir, the Bahir, the Cholos, the Zohar, and the various parts of the real Torah contain the basic teachings which have been passed down through the prophets and sages from Moshe. At the time, I can't commit these teachings to writing. Interestingly enough, all these works are obscure to the point of begging the question, what was gained? What had been written down remained, as the Torah had been in its time, a closed book. The keys were to remain oral. Just enough had been written down to ensure that only someone familiar with the tradition would understand. This whole corpus of writings, ranging from the practical understanding of the commandments to the most sublime experience of prophecy, remained a closed book. Yet the Kabbalah tradition had been saved. So the idea was, yes, it's true. You still needed to have tools which came from elsewhere. But at least the core had been preserved, and now people would be able to reference it. We mentioned one of the main pillars of Kabbalah was Zohar from the school of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Was built on the teaching of the Zohar. The two greatest Kabbalists of modern times built their entire systems. Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, known as the Ramak, and Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Luria, universally referred to as Vari, an acronym for Eloki. Rabbi Yitzchak, the godly Rabbi Yitzchak. I always thought it meant Adonenu Rabbi Yitzchak, but okay, if it's Eloki, it's Eloki. Yeah. Now, the next paragraph, I have the next few paragraphs I have difficulty with, to be honest with you. And if I actually believe them to be 100% true, I would not be able to learn Zohar. The Zohar is opaque. Very often, the Aryeh used to take a passage from the Zohar and meditate on it, perhaps repeating it over and over again like a mantra till the inner meaning was revealed to him. This is evidently a quote from the Kisvei Aryeh, which himself is not written from the Aryeh. The main relation between the writings of the Aryeh, Kisvei Aryeh, and the Zohar is that without the Aryeh's teachings, the Zohar does not make any sense at all. That's an exaggeration of the highest order. The Zohar makes sense. There's a lot of sense it makes without the Kisvei Aryeh. And to be honest with you, again, if you had to know Kisvei Aryeh in order to learn the Zohar, it gets very, very tedious and very, very mathematical. And now that I'm doing Zohar, going through it, yes, you need to have a basic knowledge of Kabbalistic concepts beyond the Zohar. That's without question. But I think if you know the Nefesh HaChaim, you're pretty well off. Certainly if you know some basic Ramchal, you're pretty well off. And certainly if you know inner space, you're pretty well off. You don't, because the Kisvei Aryeh get into minutia and details, which I find they're a classic example of when you learn to look at the Sulam and other great commentaries, Kvodim V'Kodim Munach, they're wonderful books, but you stop seeing the forest because of all the trees, because you get hung up in the details. So, but okay, obviously for a person who was able to master the Kisvei Arizal, which are voluminous and extraordinarily detailed and extremely complicated, then many aspects of the Zohar are open to you. You could study the Zohar, which is a very poetic text, but you cannot detect any system or structure. Once you know the Kisvei Arizal, the entire Zohar comes an open book. I don't think that's literal either. It's still a lot of hard work. For example, you could study the qualities of metal to see that silver is white, gold is yellow, copper is red. Certain things are harder, others softer. Yet you will not understand the reason for any of these things until you know atomic theory and solid state physics. Which, for those of us who don't like science, I don't think it matters that much. We don't really care. We appreciate the hadar, the outer glory, without necessarily understanding always the hod, the inner secrets. But that's also a level of appreciation. It's also inspirational. And it comes back to our understanding how Hasidim deal with Kabbalah.
Rabbi, I had a question. He mentions that, the Kabbalistic tradition was passed down and then it gets written, sort of like Mishnayos, for not being lost. But then we talk about these Chedushim and more Giloi and revelation happening through people like Aryeh. How do we understand that? We don't have that with like Mishnayos.
It's the opposite.
Yes,
it's the opposite. Yes.
So how do we explain that?
Because the way the Kabbalah explain it, since Kabbalah is part of the process of Geula, the closer you get to Geula, the more the secrets are revealed. Now, the question is, has that actually continued beyond the time of, say, the 19th century? It's a good question. I don't know. I assume those who are big Hasidim of the Leshem and other Leinim Kabbalim would say, yes, it did continue. But that's the idea, that the closer you get to the Gula, the more these things become revealed.
So even though he says that Kabbalah was initial, whatever, the school of prophecy, basically we're getting more access to more information over time than the original school of prophecy had?
Well, not access to prophecies themselves, but to Kabbalistic concepts. In other words,
we don't have the access to those prophetic schools. No. We get it watered down in books,
yes,
but nonetheless, there's something that's a higher grade.
And presumably, this is all hidden until now, and now becomes more revealed. In other words, it's not as if yes, the Arizal is regarded as having had special Giluim, and the Ramchal and others also had Giluim, but now, once those, I don't know if that period Giluim is still in effect. I think now it's all those Giluim being more widespread, as the Baal Shem Tov spoke, Shefutza Man Chutza.
But it's just odd. I can't say that we have more access to insights than.
Look, you have the Agadata too. The Maharal. The Maharal did an Agadata. I don't think it's such a big. Only in other areas of Torah, the principle does not necessarily apply. That things became less understood over time. Even halacha, and we're going to run out of time, so maybe we should take this up again next time. Even halacha, if you believe in Yeshiva Shalomdus, then you believe that the revelations which took place in the 20th century, which weren't necessarily revealed to earlier generations. Yes, you find sources for them in Rishonim, but you can't find the Rogachover except in the Rogachover. So this is it's not so simple what you're saying. This Niskanu Adairos is about the people, not about the insights and knowledge. The people are not on the same level they once were, but the insights and knowledge, like the way Reb Tzadok puts it, it's like a dwarf on top of a giant. So yes, of course we're dwarves. We're standing on top of giants. So maybe we can even see further than they did. It's a beautiful mashal. I don't think it's his, but he uses it in order to explain how later generations can have revelation, earlier generations did not. Okay, we'll have to come back to the next time because the left and left are going to get cut off. And thank you very much. And everybody should have a good Chodesh and a good Shabbos and Mishnah Chasad and Marvin Simcha.
Thank you.
Shabbos.